Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws. Today we're doing Book 18, which is I think is second to last book of Part 3, which deals with issues of climate and environment. Okay, climate, terrain. Today's topic is on the laws in relation to the nature of the terrain, right? The land, the geography, right? The geography, the physical. It's not just geography, but by geography he means, or we would mean the physical space, which also involves the climate, but also things like highlands, hills, valleys, and things like this, which explains that these physical traits shape aspects of what kind of regime, the kind of political order that's possible in that sense. Because it also depends whether you're going to be defendable, undefendable, and so forth like this. So let's look at this. Right, read through this. This is one of those chapters that are longish. It is 31 chapters, so it is kind of longish. I think the longest chapter here is going to be. Um, let me just do something. I want to silence it. Silence it. Silence it, the lambs. So we don't have this all day long. Largest chapter here. Okay, yeah, this doesn't have the super long chapters. So we'll see how it goes. So 31 chapters. So let's go chapter 1. Chapter 1. How how the nature of the terrain influences laws. The goodness of a country's land establishes dependence there natural. Okay. So therefore, the goodness of land. By goodness of land means how fruitful it is, how the shape of it is for certain things. So therefore, the goodness of a country's land establishes dependence there naturally. The people in the countryside, who are the great part of the people, are not very careful of their liberty. So therefore, he's basically saying that the countryside is not very careful of their liberty in that sense. And actually, as you understand, before the emergence of modern technology, by contemporary technology, 20th century, um, um, farming, it used to take that almost 80% of the population. It took 10 people to feed 8 people or 9 people there, right? So therefore, the majority of the population was agriculture. Today, with technology and technological things, well, it's 1 out of 10. One person feeds 10 people, even more. Okay, so therefore, like today, maybe even less than 6% of the United States population deals with farming in a way that would that provides the resources that not only feed the United States, but also allows for export. So let's continue this right point. But he's saying that the people who are in the countryside are not very careful about their liberty. They are too busy and too full of their individual matters of business. A countryside bursting with goods fears pillage. It fears an army. Okay, so therefore, if the countryside is filled with goods, um, it is also one that fears pillage. Who is it that forms the good parties? Cicero ex Atticus. It is the people in commerce. And in the countryside, is it the people in commerce? And in the countryside, not unless we imagine that the people for whom all governments are equally provided are provided they are tranquil, oppose monarchy. Provided they, in other words, this is Cicero's line. Let's see. This is note 1. This is Cicero's letter to Atticum, right? It is the people. Is it the people in commerce and in the countryside? Not unless we imagine that the people for whom all governments are equally provided, they provided they are tranquil, oppose monarchy. Okay, so therefore, the tranquil, in other words, all governments are equal as long as they're tranquil and that they oppose monarchy. Thus, government by one alone appears more frequently in fertile countries, and governments by many in countries that are not. So, fertile countries, resources. In other words, by fertile, he means by this resources. We have lots and lots and lots of resources. He's going to make a weird argument. This argument is that in sparse countries where it's not this, government of one, in other words, government of one alone appears more frequently in fertile countries, and governments by many in countries that are not, which is sometimes a compensation for them. Okay? The barrenness of the Attic terrain established popular government there. And the fertility of Lacedaemonian terrain, aristocratic government. For in those days in Greece, one did not want government by one alone. For now, aristocratic government is more closely related to the government by one alone. Plutarch tells us that when the seduction of Cleon had been pacified in Athens, the town fell back into its former dissensions and was divided into as many parties as there were sorts of territories in the country of Attica. The people in the mountains wanted popular government at any cost. Those in the plain demanded government by the principal men. Those near the sea were for government mixing the two. So this is interesting. In mountains, people in the mountains with bad terrain or difficult terrain, they wanted what? Popular government, right? They wanted popular government. They wanted to be free at any cost. Those on the plains wanted government of those who could deliver things, principal men. They wanted tranquil government. Okay, and then the sea is a compromise. They want both, mixing of the two. In that sense, they want to be free, but they also want tranquility. Okay, and effectiveness in that sense. So that's the thing. Chapter 2, continuation of the same subject. The fertile countries have plains where one can dispute nothing with the stronger man. Therefore, one submits to him. And when one has submitted to him, the spirit of liberty cannot return. The goods of the countryside are the guarantee of faithfulness. In other words, the goods of the countryside are a guarantee of faithfulness to the system, the political order. So therefore, the strong man, the plains mean a strong man can come and just dominate the plains. This is the problem. That means there's no security, nothing. Makes it very easy to. But in mountainous countries, one can preserve what one has, and one has little to preserve. So it's a double set. In other words, it's very difficult. In other words, here the benefit of this taking control. This has great benefit. So the benefit is very strong, high, but the cost to do anything here is low. In the mountains, the costs are very high to take it, and the value is pretty low. Hence the situation. Liberty, that is, the government they enjoy, is the only good worth defending. Okay, that's the point about the mountains. Therefore, it rains more frequently in mountainous and more difficult countries than in those which nature has favored more. Okay? And that's a little point about resources. Like why Africa has never had popular government. Africa, where there's lots of resources and nature's favored it heavily. Then why didn't America? Well, America never had popular. I mean, the inhabitants of America never brought. In other words, the real inhabitants of America never had any kind of. In South America, where it was more natural climate in that sense, there was a despotic government of one alone. the big empires, right? The northern tribes were aristocratic in that sense. They were tribe hunter gatherers, never really agrarian in any full sense. Um, it is the Europeans who come from a socio-climate with socio-resources, a socio-climate that required human artifice and technology to produce better things, deforestation and this, and innovation and hard work, that come and settle into the Americas. Okay, okay, this is uh, the mountainous people preserve their more moderate government because they are not as greatly exposed to conquest. They defend themselves easily. They are attacked with great difficulty. Ammunition provisions are brought together and transported against them at great expense, as the countries provide neither. Therefore, it is more difficult to wage war against them, more dangerous to undertake it, and there is less occasion for all the laws one makes for the people's security. In other words, all the laws for one makes against the people's security. There is an occasion for all the laws one makes for the people's. Therefore, there is less occasion in that situation of trying to do that. Chapter 3: which countries are most cultivated? Countries are not cultivated in proportion to their fertility, but in proportion to their liberty. And if one divides the earth in thought, one will be astonished to see that most of the time, the most fertile parts are deserted, and the greatest people, and that great people are in those where terrain seems to refuse everything. So this is a very interesting point he says here: is that there's a disproportionate connection that they're not cultivated in proportion to their fertility. In other words, how much resources they have, how natural the land itself produces stuff. In fact, their liberty. In fact, if one divides the earth, one would see that the most fertile are deserted or conflicted over. In that sense, and where those of the terrain, where there are great peoples, the terrain seems to refuse everything. Harsh terrain, right? It is natural for people to leave a bad country in search of a better, and not for them to leave a good country in search of worse. Right. So, therefore, most invasions occurs in countries' natures that the countries' natures have made to be happy, and and as nothing is and as nothing is nearer to devastation than invasion, the best countries most often lose their population, whereas the wretched countries of the north continue to be inhabited because they are most uninhabitable. Historians' account for the crossing of the Danube by the Scandinavian peoples show that it was not a conquest, but only a migration into deserted lands. Therefore, these happy climates have been depopulated by other migrations, and we do not know what tragic things occurred. Many records show, says Aristotle. This is, I think, three. This is okay. This is that famous book. One of the books wrote by or the one who wrote the book, the miracles of Escumabus, right? This whole question of this, right? That Sardinia is a Greek colony. It was formerly rich, and Aristus, whose love for agriculture had been so vaunted, gave it laws. But it had fallen into ruin since then, for when the Carthaginians made themselves master of it, they destroyed everything that they could make to that they could make it to make it fit to nourish men, and prohibited cultivating the land on penalty of death. Sardinia had not recovered in Aristotle's time, and nor has it to this day. The most temperate parts of Persia, Turkey, Muscovia, and Poland have not been able to recover from the devastation of the greater and lesser Tartars. Okay? So therefore, the Tartars, the Graders and less Tartars, they invaded these lands and they never really recovered in Montesquieu's time, right? Fully recovered. Chapter 4, effects of the fertility and barrenness of the country. Barrenness of land makes men industrious, sober, inured to work, courageous, and fit for war. They must procure for themselves what terrain refuses them. The fertility of a country gives, along with ease, softness, and certain love of preservation of life. So, okay, this is this word thing that barrenness produces tough people, whereas high fertility lands, beneficial lands, produce laziness and the love of survival, love of one's own life. It has been observed that the troops of Germany levied in places where the peasants are rich, as as in Saxony, are not as good as others. Again, that's This is the Prussians. The Prussians came from from a very tough and barren land. Saxons come from much better land. The Prussians are tougher than the Saxons in that sense. Military laws can provide for this drawback by more severe discipline. So therefore, to ensure laziness, in case if you have lazy people, you need militaries can control for this only through discipline. Lazy, use the strict, very ruthless discipline can force rich, lazy people to act strongly. Okay. Chapter 5, Iron people. Iron peoples are more inclined to liberty than continental peoples. Islands are usually small. One part of the people cannot be easily employed to oppress the other. The sea separates them from great empires, and tyranny cannot reach them. Conquerors are checked by the sea. Invaders are not overrun by conquest. And they preserve their laws more easily. So it's this idea, every island people are in liberty. But England, the idea of England is that England was conquered by conquerors. Its closeness to France made it possible. So yes, it's at one level an island, but it's too close, and that it was conquered and it was oppressed and it was changed by them. Right? Chapter 6, on countries formed by industrious men. Countries which have been made inhabited by men of industry of men, which which need the same industry in order to exist, call for moderate government. So, in other words, if you are going to have to use industry to survive, you need moderate government. There are three principal ones. The two fine provinces of Klang and Qing in China, Egypt and Holland. The former emperors were not conquerors. The first thing they did to enlarge their country was the one that most demonstrated their wisdom. The finest province in the empire were seen to rise from under the water. They were made by men. The indescribable fertility of those two provinces, indescribable fertility of those two provinces has given Europe its ideas of the facility of that vast region. Felicity of that region. This is the Dutch, right? This is this is interesting. The Chinese talk about this. First, it says the first one, right? The first thing they did was not to enlarge they did to enlarge their country was the one that most of the provinces of empires arose from water, right? But the continuous care necessary to protect such an important part of the empire from destruction required the mores of a wise people rather than a voluptuous one, the legitimate powers of a monarch rather than the tyrannical powers of a despot. Power had to be moderate there, as it was in the past times in Egypt, okay, the lands of the water and the things like this, right? To control the river, control the thing. Power had to be moderate there, as the past time of Egypt. Power had to be moderate there as it was in Holland, which nature made so that the attention would be paid to her and that she would not be abandoned to indifference or caprice. And thus, in spite of the climate of China, where one is by nature inclined to servile obedience, in spite of the horrors that attend to excessively large empire, the first legislatures of China were obliged to make very good laws, and the government was often was obliged to observe them. Chapter 7 of the Works of Men. Men, by their care and their good laws, have made the earth more fit to be their home. So, therefore, good laws and good works, right? By their care and their good laws, made earth to be more fit to be their home. We see rivers flowing where there were lakes and marshes. It is good that nature did not make, but which is maintained by nature. So, therefore, the idea is that it is a good that nature did not make, but nature maintains it, right? When the Persians were the masters of Asia, they permitted those who divert the waters from their sources to a place that had not yet been watered to enjoy it for 5 generations. And as many streams flow from the Tartars mountain, they spared no expense at getting water from there. Today, one finds it in one's field and gardens without knowing where it came from. Thus, just as destructive nations do evil that lasts longer than ourselves, there are industrious nations that do good things that do not end with themselves. So, therefore, the idea of the Persians, what the Persians didn't accomplish. Chapter 8, General Relations of Laws. The laws are very closely related to the way that various people procure their sustenance. So, therefore, again, this is right out from Aristotle. Laws are connected to the way of sustenance, the way of life. The sustenance is tied to the way of life, right? This is right out of Aristotle, Book I. There must be a more extensive code of laws for people attached to commerce and the sea than for people satisfied with to cultivate the land. So, therefore, in other words, commerce and sea which again tied to commerce, as well as food, getting food from the sea, needs extensive codes of laws, right? Than people who just merely cultivate land. There must be a greater one for the latter than for people who live by the herds. So the former and latter. Okay. In other words, herd people people cultivate lands. Okay. Sea people and commercial people need more than farmers and cultivators and cultivators, but herders, they need more than herders, right? There must be a greater one for these last men than for people who live by hunting. So, hunter gatherers like this, then herders, then this is really the culture of civilization. Commerce, agriculture. This is farmers, cultivating of land, agrarian, herders, hunter gatherers, hunters. Chapter 9 on the American terrain. There are so many savage nations in North America because the land by itself produces much fruit for which to nourish them. If the woman cultivates a bit of earth around her hut, grow corns immediately. Hunting and fishing complete their abundance. Moreover, grazing animals like cattle, buffalo, etc., succeeds better there than carnivorous beasts and beasts that eat the other animals. So the American terrain, he says, what? It's very fruitful. It's very interesting that so many savage nations in North America, because the land itself produces much fruit. The fruit is just there. There's lots of fruit. There's a lot of berries. And when there's women cultivate women cultivate a little bit of earth around huts, corn will grow immediately. Okay, so therefore, what fish hunting and fishing completes their abundance. They're hunter gatherers. And animals graze like cattle and buffalo and things like this succeed better there because than carnivorous beasts. The later had dominion in Africa from time immemorial. In other words, converted species. I believe one would not have had all these advantages. I believe one would not have had all these advantages in Europe if the earth were left uncultivated. In other words, Europe, if the land wasn't cultivated, Europe would not have any of the advantages of America. There would scarcely be anything but forests of oaks and other unproductive trees. So that Europe was basically filled with oak and unproductive trees. This is that sense. This is that fundamental sense. Cultivation, agricultural cultivation, cultivating the land produced the wealth of Europe. America was lucky. It was just lucky, and that the American terrain is just nice, and that it never produced the people in that sense. That it took a hard-working European people, a people shaped by the harshness of the land, to be strong. That when they come to America, they're able to maximize the benefit of this, because the Americans never able, particularly in the North, in North America, were never able. They never got out of hunter-gatherer societies. They were stuck at best, mostly hunter-gathering. Okay. 10. On the number of men in relation to their way of procuring sustenance. The number of men in nations that do not cultivate the land is found in the following proportion. As production of an uncultivated terrain is to the production of a cultivated terrain, so the number of savages in the country is to the number of plowmen in another. And as for the people who cultivate the land, and also cultivate the arts, as follows a proportion that would require many details. So therefore, there's this idea. In other words, the number of men that do not cultivate. In other words, number of men in a nation that do not cultivate the land is found in proportion. In other words, as production of uncultivated terrain is to the production of a cultivated terrain. So the number of savages in one country is the number of plowmen in another. So I'm not sure about that. Okay, that's a weird argument, right? And for the people who cultivate lands is quite a thing. They can scarcely form a large nation if they are herdsmen. They need a large country so that any number of them can continue to exist. If they're hunters, they are still fewer in number, and they form in order to obtain a livelihood, a smaller nation. So hunters will smaller things at this at best, and they move around, right? Hunters, if hunters, they are still small. Herdsmen need a large country in order that they can survive. So they need a large territory. The hunters can have a small, but they go where the food is, right? They come together. They are few in number, and they form in order to maintain a life. They're a smaller nation. Their country is ordinary full of forest, and as men have not dug canals for water, it is filled with marshes, where each band camps and forms a small nation. So the marshes, they live near the marshes. Chapter 11: Savage peoples and barbarian peoples. One difference between savage people and barbarian peoples is that the former are small, scattered nations, which, for certain particular reasons, cannot unite, whereas barbarians are ordinary small nations that can unite together. So savages are small nations who are scattered and cannot unite, and barbarians are often small nations that can unite. The former are usually hunting people, and the latter pastoral people. So the savages are hunting, and the barbarians are pastoral. And this is clearly seen in northern Asia. The people of Siberia could not live together in a body because they could not feed themselves. The Tartars can live together in a body, for sometimes because their herds can be brought together for that time. All the herds can therefore unite, and this occurs when one leader has subjected many others, after which they must either separate or they must set out to make some great conquest of empire to the south. So that's the barbarian people, right? This is the example of the Tartars, right? The Siberian, the Inuit peoples, the Inuits in the north, and the Tartars in the south. Chapter 12 on the right of nations among people who do not cultivate the land. As those people do not live on a limited and prescribed terrain, right? They don't cultivate land. They will have many things to quarrel about. They will dispute over uncultivated land, as our citizens dispute over inheritance. Thus, they will find frequent occasions for war in their hunting and their fishing, and in providing food for their livestock and carrying away slaves. And lacking a territory, they will have so many things to regulate by the right of nations that they will have few to decide by civil right. So therefore, they don't. In other words, all their disputes are going to be about. He's saying that barbarian people who don't cultivate the land, right? Well, because of the migrations and the way that he says here about that they will be conflicting with each other, they will basically shaped by the rights of nations, which is the rights of nations are the laws of people. This is Roman law, this is international law. The us gentum, right? The us gentum, the laws of nation, the laws of people. This is the people to people disputes. And that therefore they're only, but it's therefore these people are going to be governed more by the laws of us gentum, the laws of the rights of nations, than civil right, us civilis, the rights of the law, civil law, their own law, their own political law. So therefore, their laws. In other words, on civil laws among people who do not cultivate land, chapter 13. It is the division of lands that principally swells civil code. The nation that does not that have not been divided there will have very few civil laws. So therefore, civil law. He's saying civil law deals mostly with property. It's going to be about mostly property, division of land, about the disputes that arise because of the division of land. Okay, if you don't have that much division of land, you're not going to have much civil law. One can call the institution of these people mores rather than laws. So what codes they will have is mostly mores, social habits. And I guess the Greeks, remember, the Greek nomos, the word for, which is can be as much mores or habits, social customs, as it means by laws, as in legislation. Okay, so therefore, this is what this dual. The nomos has this double nature of what we would say is social customs, social mores versus legal provisions. This is the point that he's pointing to here. That okay, the more you cultivate the land, the more you're going to have to do it. People who don't cultivate the land like this are going to be governed more by mores than by laws, right? In such nation, the old men who remember things of the past have great authority. One cannot be one cannot be distinguished by one's goods there, but by arms and by counsel. So therefore, wealth is not. It's very difficult that in those. If you don't have property, you don't divide property. It's going to be hard to establish people because of your wealth, your land, but rather your arms, how strong you are, soldiers you have, warriors you have with you, and your counsel, your judgment. Okay, these people wander and scatter over the pastures or the forest. Marriage will not be as secure as among ourselves, where it is fixed by the home and where the wife is attached to the house. They can more easily, therefore, change wives, have several of them, and sometimes mingle indifferently like beasts. Okay, this is no land. This is our culture. The idea: hunting gatherers are people moving about. They don't have a home. This is not the wife. The wife. In other words, this is that marriage is going to be more flexible in hunter-gatherer society than this because why? It's going to be what he says. It's not no fixed location. The wife will have authority over, and therefore it'll be easy to exchange or intermingle them, right? Pastoral people cannot be separated from their herds, which provide their sustenance, nor can they be separated from their wives, who take care of them. All this should therefore go together. The more so, because as they ordinarily live in great plains, where a few strongholds are built, their wives, children, and herds become prey of the enemy. So therefore, this is the move from the hunter-gatherers to the pastoral. The pastoral people, again, these herders, right? The herders, right? Their wives cannot be separated from their wives, and therefore their wives, their children, and herds become prey for the enemy. Their laws will regulate the division of the spoils. And will, like our Salic laws, pay particular attention to theft. Okay, right. Chapter 14, on the political state of people who do not cultivate land. These people enjoy great liberty. So if you don't cultivate the land, right, these people enjoy great liberty. For as they do not cultivate land, they are not attached to it. They are wanderers, vagabonds, and if a leader wanted to take their liberty from them, they would immediately go and seek it with another leader, or withdraw into the woods to live there with their family. Among these people, liberty of the man is so great that it's necessary to bring it necessarily brings with it the liberty of the citizen. So this is the idea that they didn't cultivate the land. The hunters-gatherers didn't cultivate the land. They have this right. They withdraw, and they go into the things. They come up with the liberty of citizen. Now this also maybe explains the romanticism of the American that Europeans had of the American Indians. They look at them as kind of like the original free people in that sense, right? Right. Chapter 15. I think isn't that kind of like this doesn't this echo what Rousseau will talk about, this idea of the native man, that there was real freedom in this natural man, this man that is not in society. Again, this is, you can see the origins of Rousseau here a little bit here. Chapter 15, of the people who know the use of money. So therefore, this is money, right? The question: when Aristippus was shipwrecked, he swam until he reached the shore. He saw geometric features traced in the sand. He rejoiced, judging that he had arrived among a Greek people, and not among a barbarian people. So first of all, he says geometric features. That this idea of this, right? Aristippus, right? Judging that he had arrived among a Greek people, right, not a barbarian. If you are alone and happen to come by accident to a land of an unknown people, and if you see a coin, reckon you have arrived with a nation with police. In other words, the idea of you have money. The second you have coinage, money, you have a social police, mores. You have a system of, in other words, regulated commerce, regulated trade. The cultivation of land requires the use of money. Cultivation assumes many arts and much knowledge, and one always sees art, knowledge, and the needs keeping pace together. So therefore, it seems to be arts, knowledge, and needs come to cultivation. So farming requires money. Why? Because exchange mechanisms to cultivation assumes many arts and much knowledge, and one sees that all knowledge is. All this leads to the establishment of a sign of value. We need a sign of value. Storms and fires lead us to discover that the earth. Storms and fires lead us to discover that Earth is the Earth contains metal. Now this is 6. What is this? Dorotus tells us shepherds found gold and silver according to the Pyrenees in this way, right? As they found that the fire thing from when they were once separated from the earth, it was easy to use them. So therefore, this became means of exchange, right? Value, a sign for value. That's what money is. A coin or money is a sign for value that you can exchange. Makes exchange easier, trade and exchange easier. Okay. And it's intermediation. Money is it means that we can say this is worth This is worth so many of that, so many of that. So therefore, instead of having to, you know, uh, 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 I want this. Well, what do I need that? Like, how many of that is worth that? Okay, you can they can exchange find a mechanism of what is worth. It is a means by which that can find a means of exchange. This and this, this and this. Okay, but this becomes a thing that allows for the person to, I want that, but I don't necessarily want that. Okay, so I use this as a mechanism. I have this, but you don't want this. This guy over here wants this. Wants this. This guy will accept this for this. In other words, okay, what happens is I convert this into money, and therefore that to that, and therefore I don't have to bring all the things. I simplify this, right? Chapter 16, the civil laws among people who do not know the use of money. When a people do not use money, one finds among them scarcely any other injustice but those stemming from violence, and and weak people by uniting defending themselves from violence. In other words, the only injustice is violence, and a weak people by uniting defending themselves against violence. Among them, therefore, there are scarcely any arrangements that are not political. So therefore, everything's political. But among a people who have established the use of money, one is subject to the injustices that come from trickery, and these can be exercised in 1,000 ways. Therefore, one is forced to have good civil laws there. These arise along with the new means and the various ways of being wicked. So, therefore, in other words, people who don't know money, they're going to have to have laws and rules. In other words, the injustice is going to come from violence, and a weak people by uniting defend themselves against violence. Right. So therefore, all their laws are going to be the arrangement and dealing with the political are political in that sense. But once you have money, there's more than ways. It's trickery and deceit and things like this. Trickery and these injustices can be thousands of ways. Therefore, you need more laws. You need laws, civil laws. In countries where there's no money, the plunderer carries away only things, and things are never alike. In countries where there's money, plunderers carry away signs, and signs are always alike. In the former country, nothing can be hidden, because the plunderer always carries away him proof of his convictions. It is not the same in the latter countries. You can hide money, you can hide the signs. In other words, this is the thing that in the former countries, you take away the things. But if you have gold and things like this, it can hide it. Okay. Chapter 17. Political laws among people who do not use money. What most secures the liberty of people who do not cultivate the land is that money is unknown to them. The fruit is hunting, fishing, and herding cannot be brought together in great enough quantities to be protected well enough for one man to be in the position to corrupt all the others. Whereas when one has signs for wealth, these signs can be amassed and distributed to whomever wants. So therefore, this is a warning that there's a simplicity in the Moors. Hunter-gatherer people, because it's going to be very difficult to have someone have wealth so powerful that they can corrupt the system. That once you have money, the money allows you to corrupt the system, he says. And therefore that becomes a threat to liberty of people. Therefore, this is the problem, that you cannot have the position to corrupt others. But money does. Among people without money, each man has few needs and satisfies them easily and equally. Equality, therefore, is forced. Thus, their leaders are not despotic. So again, this is that without money, there is therefore equality. It's very difficult for someone to have more than everyone else. money. Okay. Oh my God, we hear all these crazy leftists, right? This is that point, right? This is you can see Rousseau, you can see the critique of this in here. But there's a valid point here about this. Understand that people have simple things. You don't need it. Therefore, it's once we have money, once we have commerce like this, you need regulation to avoid despotism. Okay. Oh my God, what you're saying here? It's not that he's not saying we should go back like them. He's just saying that okay, these are the problems that are going to happen when you have money. That it's going to be very difficult to have equality here in a situation where there's going to be people like this, because unless there's laws enforcing it, the forced equality of that is the net fact that there's no wealth, that the nature of what resources we have and that are doesn't allow for the gathering of anyone to have such power or wealth. So therefore, the forcedness of equality is that nature, that the lack of being able to hold together resources and wealth, and any person to have so much. Um, uh, 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 and that's a good thing, though. That wealth corrupts that wealth, that gives them power, and that power leads to kind of them desiring dominating others, right? Their leaders are not despotic in that sense. Chapter 18, Force of Superstition. If what the accounts tell us is true, the constitution of the people of Louisiana, called the Natchez, is an exception. Their leader controls the disposition of the goods of all his subjects, and makes them work together according to his fancy. They cannot refuse him their heads. He is like the Grand Signor, the Turkish emperor, right? The Grand Signor, Turkish emperor. When an heir presumptive is born, he is given all the suckling children to serve him during his life. You would say he is the great Sorotis, the great Sorotis. This leader is treated. This leader is treated in his hut with ceremonies one would give an emperor in Japan or China. The prejudice of superstitions are greater than all the other prejudices, and the reason and its reasons greater than all the other reasons. So prejudice and superstition are greater than all the other prejudices, and the justifications for and its reasons, the logic of it, is greater than all other reasons. Thus, although savage people do not know despotism naturally, these people know it. They worship the sun, and if its leader had not imagined that he was the brother of the sun, they would have found in him only a poor wretch like themselves. In other words, this is the Sun Emperor, right? This is the idea that he was this brother of the sun. That they worship the sun, so he's the brother of the sun, and therefore they worship them like that. The superstition of the Nast is Nastes. I think that's the Incas, right? As Aztecs, right? The Aztecs. This is the Aztec. Natchez. Chapter 19. Oh, but he says Louisiana. That's kind of like the French territory up there. Gnostics up there. Okay. Chapter 19, on the liberty of the Arabs and the servitude of the Tartars. The Arabs and the Tartars are pastoral people. The Arabs belong to the great Arabs belong to the general case we have mentioned in our free, where the Tartars, with the most singular people on the earth, are in political slavery. Now, again, when the Khan is proclaimed, the people shout, may his word serve him as a sword," right? And as we have already seen, and this is book 7, this is book 17, chapter 5, which we read about the Tatars, right? As we have already, I have already given some reasons for this last fact. Here are some others. They have no towns. They have no forests. They have few marshes. Their rivers are almost always frozen. They live in an immense plain. They have pastures and herds, and consequently goods. They have no place of retreat or defense. As soon as a Khan is vanquished, his head is cut off. So are his children, and all his subjects belong to the vanquisher. They are not. They are not condemned to civil slavery. They would be burdensome to the simple nation, which had no land to cultivate and no need of domestic service. Therefore, they increase the nation. Therefore, they increase the nation. But one conceives that political slavery instead of civil slavery has 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 had to appear. So therefore, that's their civil slavery. It's political slavery rather than civil slavery had to appear in this situation. And indeed, in a country where the various hordes are continually at war and constantly conquer one another, where the political body of each vanquished horde is always destroyed by the death of the leader, the nation in general can scarcely be free, for there is not a single part of it that must not have been subjugated by a great many, subjugated a great many times. Vanquished people can preserve some liberty when, by the strength of their situation, they are in a position to make treaties after their defeat. But the Tartars, always defenseless once vanquished, have never been able to make such conditions. So therefore, vanquished people can sometimes they're strong enough that they can make a treaty, but okay. But the Tartars have never happened, right? Once the vanquished have been able to make the conditions. As I said in chapter 2, that the inhabitants of cultivated plains are scarcely free. The circumstances put the Tartars, who lived in a wasteland, in a similar situation. So the fact that they lived in a wasteland, they usually, in other words, that the the plain was a wasteland because of the no one could cultivate it. They would always take it, and warrior it, right? But therefore they were there, and there's no dividing areas, no marshes, no forests, no nothing. So, like chapter 20 on the rights of nations among Tartars. The Tartars appear gentle and humane to each other. They are very cruel conquerors. They put to the sword the inhabitants of the towns they take. They believe themselves merciful when they sell or distribute the inhabitants to their soldiers. They have destroyed Asia from the Indies to the Mediterranean. The whole country that forms east of Persia had become deserted on account of them. So therefore, they're cruel. Their right of nations is cruel. There's no mercy. They kill towns. They'll distribute their soldiers. They have destroyed Asia and Indies to Mediterranean. Whole countries that form this have been deserted on their account. Here is what seems to me to have produced such a right of nations. These people had no towns at all. All their wars were waged quickly and impetuously. They expected to vanquish. They fought. They joined the stronger army when they did not expect to win. Such customs they found that it was contrary to their right to their nation. In other words, it was contrary to their right of nations for a town that could not resist to check them. They did not consider a town as as an assembly. They did not consider a town as an assembly of inhabitants, but a place apt to escape their power. But a, but as a place apt to escape their power, they had no art for besieging towns, and they exposed themselves greatly when they did so. They took blood revenge for all the blood that they spilt. So in other words, because they had no, they it was towns caused blood on them. Okay, they themselves would join together like this. When a town resisted or attempted to resist, they would take vengeance on them for any blood that was spilled. Right. Chapter 21: The Civil Laws of the Tartars. Father Deluc says that among the Tartars, it is always the last male child who inherits, because as the older one gradually reach a position to lead the pastoral life, they leave their house with a certain quality of livestock given them by their father and go build a new dwelling. Therefore, the last of the males remains in the house when his father, with the father as natural heir. I've heard I have heard it said that a similar custom was observed in some small districts in England, and it is still found in Brittany in the Duchy of Rouen, where it applies to commoners. No doubt, it's a pastoral law that um, came from some lesser Breton people, or was brought by some Germanic people. It is known from Caesar and Tacitus that these later cultivated the land but little. That these people, the Bretons and the Germanic peoples, didn't really cultivate the land that much. They were hunter gatherers for the most part. 22. The civil laws of the Germanic people. I shall explain here how a particular text from Salic law, the text usually called the Salic law, concerns the institutions of a people who did not cultivate the land, or at least cultivated but little. When a man leaves children, the Salic law wants the male to inherit the Salic land in preference to the daughters. In order to know what the Salic lands were, one must discover what property was and what the use of the land was among the Franks before they left Germany. M. Markert has nicely proven that the word Salic comes from the word Sala, which means house, and thus that the Salic lands was the lands around the house. Let's see. The lands around the house. I shall go further and examine what were the house and the land around the house among the Germans. They do not live in towns, said Tacitus. They cannot tolerate their houses touching one another. Each leaves around his house a small parcel of ground or space which is enclosed and shut in. Tacitus spoke correctly, for many laws in the barbarian code have different provisions for those who knock down this enclosure and those who entered the house itself. And for those who enter the house itself, so knock down the enclosure versus going into the house itself. There's different proportions of the laws for this, right? The barbarian codes. This is the 13th. This is the Germanies of legis eredemonum. So that's we know from Tacitus and Caesar that the lands the Germans cultivated were given to them for only a year, and again became public again. The Germans had no patrimony other than the house and that bit of land within the enclosure around the house. Yes, this is again. This enclosure was called curl as the charters. Right? This particular patrimony belonged to the males. Indeed, why would it have belonged to the daughters? They entered other houses. Therefore, the Salic land was the enclosure appended to the German's house. It was the only property he had. After the conquest of Franks, acquired new properties, which continued to be called Salic lands. When the Franks lived in Germany, their goods were slaves, herds, horses, arms. The houses and the small portions of land adjoining it were naturally given to the male children who were to live there. But when the Franks acquired extensive lands after the conquest, it was found harsh that the daughters and their children could not have a share. A usage was introduced which permitted the father to recall his daughter and his daughter's children. The law was silenced, and these sorts of recalls must have been common because formulas were made for them. Right. This is 15. This is Markov, the appendix of Markov, and those laws. Right. Those. Among all these formulae, I find a singular one. A grandfather recalls his grandchildren to inherit with his sons and daughters. Um, what had the Salak law become? It must have no longer. It must have no longer. It it must have been no longer observed, even at that time, or the continual usage of recalling daughters must have qualified them to inherit in the most ordinary sense. As the Salak land did not have as its purpose a preference for one sex over the other. It had still less of a no, it had still less than of perpetuating a family, a name, or a transfer of land. None of this entered into the heads of the Germans. It was purely economic law which gave the house and the land around it to the males who were to live in it, and who were and for whom, consequently, it was best suited. Uh, um, yeah, this is the longest chapter. Oh yeah, chapter 22. Okay, this is the long one, 27 paragraphs. One needs only transcribe here the unalloyans law, that famous text so talked about and so little read. 1. If a man dies without children, his father or his mother will inherit from him. 2. If he has neither father nor mother, his brother or sister will inherit from them. 3. If he has neither brother nor sister, his mother or sister will inherit from them. 4. If his mother had no sister, his father or sisters will inherit from them. If his father has no sister, the nearest relative on the male side will inherit. 6. No portion, part of the Salic land will pass to females, but it belongs to the males. That is, the male children will inherit from their father. Okay, 17. This is no portion of the Salic land, but will inherit from the male sex. And that is, the son shall succeed from the inheritance. This is the exact phrase of the passage. Right? No portion. It is clear that the first 5 articles concern the inheritance of one who dies without children, and the 6th, the inheritance of one who has children. When a man died without children, the law wanted one sex to be preferred. When a man died without children, the law wanted one sex to be preferred over the other only in certain cases. In the first 2 degrees of inheritance, the advantage of males and females were the same. In the 4th and 5th, women were preferred. Males were preferred in the 5th. I find the seeds of these eccentricities in Tacitus. The children of sisters, this is from Germanica, he says, are cherished by their uncles as by their own father. These are some people who consider this bond as closer and even holier. They prefer it when they take hostages. This is why our first historians tell us so much about the love of the Frankish kings for their sisters and their sisters' children. For if the children of sisters were regarded in the brother's house as his own, it was natural for the children to regard their aunt as their own mother. The mother's sister was preferred to the father's sister. This is explained by the text of the Salak law. When a woman was a widow, she came under the guardianship of her husband's relatives. The law preferred the female relatives to the male relatives for the guardianship. Indeed, a woman who entered a family and joined those persons of her sex was closer to the female relatives than to the male relatives. Moreover, when one man had killed another man, he could not satisfy the pecuniary penalty he incurred, the law permitted him to cede his goods, and his relative had to make up what was lacking. After his father, mother, and brother, it was his mother's sister who paid. And if this bond had something more tender about it, as if this bond had something more tender about it. Now, the kinship that gives burdens had likewise to give advantages. The Salic law wanted the closest male relative after the father sister to have inheritance, but if he were a relative beyond the fifth degree, he would not inherit it. Thus, a woman of the fifth degree would have inherited in preference to a male of the sixth, and this is seen in the law of the repudiant Franks, a faithful interpreter of the Salic law in the article concerning allied lands, where it followed step by step the same article of that law. If a father left children, the Salic law wanted the daughters to be excluded from the inheritance of the Salic land, and wanted this to belong to the male children. It would be easy for me to prove that a Salic land did not exclude daughters from the Salic lands without distinction, but rather only in the case where brothers would exclude them. This is seen in the Salic law itself, which, after saying that the women would possess nothing of the Salic land, and that only men would interprets and restrains them. That is, it says, the son will inherit the father's legacy. 2. The text of the Salic law is clarified by the law of the repudiant Franks, which was also an article on the allied lands quite in conformity with the Salic law. 3. The laws of these barbarian people, who all come from Germany, interpret each other. The more so because they have all nearly the same spirit. The laws of the Saxons want the father and mother to leave the inheritance to their son and not to their daughter. But if there are only daughters, it wants them to have the entire inheritance. 4. We have two older formulas, which presuppose the case in accord with the Salic law. Daughters are excluded by males. This is when they compete with their brothers. Okay, so therefore they're competing with their brothers. 5. Another formula proves that the daughters inherit in preference to the grandson. Therefore, she was excluded only by the son. 6. If the daughters had been generally excluded from the inheritance of the land by the Salic law, it would be impossible to explain the history's formula and characters, which constantly speak of the lands and goods of women under the Merovingians. Okay, so it has been mistakenly said that the Salic laws were fiefs. In other words, the Salic lands were not fiefs. The article is entitled "The Alloy Lands." 2. In the beginning, fiefs were not hereditary. So, 3. In Salic lands, if the Salic lands had been fief, how could Markov have treated as impious a custom which excluded women from inheriting them? For even males did not inherit fiefs. 4. The charters that are cited to prove that the Salic lands were fief prove only that they were free lands. Right? This is E. Terres Frenches. Occasionally, Montesquieu uses French meaning free. The instance are marked in these notes. Right? 5. The fiefs were established only after conquest, and Salic usages existed before the Franks left Germany. 6. It was not Salic land that, by limiting the inheritance of women, formed the establishment of fiefs, but rather the establishments of fief that put limits on both the inheritance of women and provisions of the Salic law. So that the fiefs, and that's the. Whew. After what we have just said, one would not believe that the personal inheritance by males of the Crown of France could come from the Salic law. So therefore, this idea that the argument of the crowns of France, the male line, that was used to deny Edward III Edward III the crown, right? And actually, the argument also took the question that became Henry V, right? Um, that this is not really tied to the Sac Law. It is, however, indubitable that it comes from there. In other words, that they took it from it. Right? I can prove this by the various codes of the barbarian peoples. The Salic laws and the laws of the Burgundian did not give daughters the right to inherit land with their brothers, nor did they inherit the crown. So the Salic law and the Burgundians. Right? The law of the Viscoffs, on the other hand, permitted daughters to inherit land with their brothers. Women were qualified to inherit the crown. Among these people, the provisions of the civil laws force the political laws. So, in other words, okay. Again, Tacitus, right? All this is um, um, 28. The sex is like this, Lungus Burgundian women. This was not the only case among the Franks where the political laws gave way to the civil law. By the provision of the Salic law, all brothers inherit the land equally, right? That's the whole problem, right, of Charlemagne, right? And this was also a provision of the law of the Burgundians. Thus, the Frankish monarchy, and in that of the Burgundians, all the brothers inherit the crown. If we accept a few cases of violence, murder, and assumptions among the Burgundians. Chapter 23. The long hair of the Frankish kings. On the long hair. People who do not cultivate land do not have even the idea of luxury. The admirable simplicity of the Germanic peoples must be seen in Tacitus. Art did not fashion their ornaments, they found them in nature. If a family of the leaders was to be marked by some sign, it was again in nature that they had to seek it. The kings of the Franks, the Burgundians, Viscoffs wore their hair as a diadem, the crown. So that's in other words, that the people who do not cultivate land, the hunters, don't they don't have luxury, and they don't have a crown in that sense. Their hair is their crown. Nature, somebody from nature would be such act as that. So that this is the Frankish kings, right? Chapter 24 on the marriage of the Frankish kings. I have mentioned earlier that among people who do not cultivate the lands, marriage was much less fixed and ordinary took several lives. The Germans were almost alone among the barbarian people to be content with a single wife. Now, 33. They, along among the range of the content with one wife, as Tacitus, much except for very few marriages are short, numerous marriages, not on account of their lust, but rather because of nobility. They will have again Tacitus again, right? Um, Among the barbarian peoples, consent to life. If one accepts, as Tacitus, some persons whom not because of their soluteness, but because of their nobility, had many wives, right? This explains why among the Moravian kings had such a great number of wives. These marriages were less an evidence of inconsonance than the attributive rank status. It would have wounded them in a tender spot to make them lose such a prerogative. This explains why the example of the kings were not followed by their subjects. Chapter 25, Childeric. Marriages among the Germans were severe, says Tacitus. Vices are not subject to ridicule. Now this is Tacitus 2036. A severe code of marriage. No one laughs at vice. No one takes it. No one says it is the spirit of the times to corrupt and be corrupted. Right. That's right. Tacitus says the vices are not subject to ridicule. There, to corrupt or to be corrupted is not called. It is not. It is not called a usage or a way of life in so numerous a nations. There are a few examples. 37. Among such a numerous people, adultery is very rare in Tacitus, right? It's very rare. Tacitus says it's very rare. Of the violation of conjugal faith. Very rare examples, right? No, adultery is very rare. So therefore, the devices are not subject to ridicule. They are corrupted, or to be corrupted. It is not called a usage or a way of life. In so numerous a nation, there are few examples of violations of conjugal faith. This explains the expulsion of Sheldrake. He offended the strict Moors that conquest had not um, had time to change. So Sheldrake, who conquered, committed adultery, and because of that, the Moors forced him to be expelled. Right? Because the conquest didn't change. The Moors were so strict that the conquest had not changed those Moors. Chapter 26, on the coming of age of the Frankish kings. Barbarian people who do not cultivate the land, have no territory properly so called, and are, as we have said, governed by the right of nations rather than civil right. Therefore, they are almost always armed. So therefore, they're always armed. Thus, Tacitus says that the Germans engaged in no public. The Germans engaged in no public or particular matters of business without being armed. Tacitus. They expressed their view by a sign they made with their weapons. If their opinions, if opinions are displeasing, they are spurned. If pleasing, they shake their spear. As soon as they could carry weapons, they were presented to the assembly. A javelin was put in their hands. From this time, they from this time on, they had left behind their childhood. They had been armed. Right? They had been a part of the family. They had become part of the republic. Right. So being armed in that sense. Eagles, as the king, eagles said the kings of the Ostrogoths, stop giving food to their little ones as soon as their feathers and claws are fallen. These little ones no longer need the helps of others when they themselves go in search of prey. It would be shameful if our youths who are in our armies were presumed to be too weak to control their own goods or regulate their own conduct of lives. Among the Goths, it is virtue that sets the coming of age. If they hold the arms, they have to hold the arms. If a virtue conducts the energy, they have to have the strength of the virtue. Childred II was 15 years old when Grencham, his uncle, declared him of age and capable of governing himself. One sees in the laws of the Repudian Franks that this age of 15, the ability to carry arms, and the time of coming of age goes together. If a Repudian died or had been killed, if a Repudian has died or been killed, it is said there that he had left his that he has left a son. The son cannot go in pursuit or be pursued in judgment unless he is fully 15 years old. At that time, he will answer for himself or choose a champion. The spirit had to be sufficiently formed for one to be able to defend oneself in a judgment, and the body, but and the body for one to be able to defend oneself in combat. Among the Burgundians, who also had usage of combat and judicial actions, the coming of age was also set at 15 years of age. So 15, the idea of the 15 coming of age is being able to spear, being able to physically hold a spear, being able to physically defend yourself. Agathis tells us that the weapons of the Franks were light, therefore they could come at age of 15. Later, weapons were heavier. They were already so in the time of Carolyn, as is apparent in our capularies and romances. Those who had fiefs and who consequently had to do military service came to age only when they were 21. Right? This is the idea because the heavy armors had to have more bodies, so they were at 21. So therefore, the fiefs, those who had fiefs and land, those who had light arms at 15, those who had to have heavy arms and do military service, had to do military service, they came to age at 21. Chapter 27, continuation of the same subject. It has been seen that among the Germans, one did not go to the assembly before reaching one's maturity. One was part of the family and not part of the republic. This caused the children of Clodumir, Clodumir, the king of Orleans and conqueror of Burgundy, not to be declared kings because they could not be presented to the assembly at their tender age. They were not yet kings, but they were to become kings when they were able to carry their weapons. And meanwhile, Cleotida, their grandmother, governed the state. So that's 49. Yeah, this is St. Louis. St. Louis came of age then. This was changing Edict of Charles V, right? That comes after Charles V. Oh no. The uncles of Cleopatra and Childebert slaughtered them and divided the kingdom. Because of this example, later princes who were wards were declared kings immediately after the death of their fathers. Thus, Duke Gondeveld saved Childebert II from the cruelty of Silibert and declared him king at the age of 5. But even with this change, one followed the first spirit of the nation, and acts were not passed in the name of the king who were wards. Thus, among the Franks, there was a double administration, the one concerning the persons of the kings, who was a ward, and another concerning the kingdom. And if the fiefs, there was a different, and in the fiefs there was a difference between guardianship and bailiffry. Bailiffry, that of the bailiff, that's the exercise of someone exercising authority. So guardianship and bailiff is one having authority over this. The official having authority over it. 28. Adoption among the Germans. As among the Germans, one came of age on receiving weapons, one was adopted by the same sign. Thus, Gunther, wanting to declare his nephew Childebert of age, and also to adopt him, told him, I put this javelin in your hand as a sign that I have given birth and that I have given you my kingdom. And thus, turning to the assembly, you see that my son Childebert has become a man. Obey him. When Theodoric, king of the Ostrogoths, wanted to adopt the king of the Hurai, he wrote to him, It is a fine thing we have that we can adopt by weapons, for courageous men who are the only ones who are worthy of becoming our children. There is such a force in this act that one who there is such a force in this act that the one who is the object of it will always prefer to die than to suffer something shameful. Thus, by custom of nations, and because you are a man, we adapt you by these shields, these swords, and these horses that we are sending you. So this is how Theodoric Ostrogoth the hero. Chapter 29, the bloodthirsty spirit of the Frankish king. Clovis was not the only prince among the Frankish who undertook expeditions into Gaul. Many of his relatives had led certain tribes there, and as he had greater success and could give greater embellishments to those who had followed him, the Franks flocked to him from all tribes, and the other leaders found themselves too weak to resist him. He formed the design of exterminating all those of his house, and succeeded at it. So therefore, in other words, 53, Gregory of Tours accounted this, ecclesiastical history of the Franks. He feared, said Gregory of Tours, that the Franks might take another leader. His children and his successor followed this practice as much as they could. The brother, uncle, and nephew, what can I say? The son, the father, were seen constantly conspiring against the rest of the family. The law constantly divided the monarchy. Fear, ambition, and cruelty wanted. In other words, law divided the monarchy. Fear, ambition, and cruelty wanted to unite it. Chapter 30 on the assemblies among the Franks. It had been it had been mentioned earlier that the people who do not cultivate the land enjoy a great liberty, right? This was the case of the Germans. Tacitus says that they gave their kings or leaders only very moderate power. And Caesar says they had no common magistrate during peacetime, but that in each village the princes rendered justice among their own. Thus, in Germany, the Franks had no king, as Gregory Torres proves nicely. Princes, okay, now this is 58. Of lesser time, only princes, consults, or great ones, everyone, but even when in a discussion within the power of people, first it was through consideration by the princes, right? So this idea is, okay, remember, princes, this is not their term, this is the Latin term, right? This is first ones, ruling citizens, that's what principatos, right? Princes, says Tacitus, deliberate on small things, the entire nation on large things, and in such a way, however, that the matters that are within the cognizance of the people are also carried to the princes. So therefore, this usage was preserved after the conquest, as seen in all the records. Tacitus says that capital crimes could be brought before the assembly. That the capital crimes could be brought before the assembly. It was the same after the conquest, and the great vassals were judged there as well. So therefore, the people of the assembly would hear it. The king was basically kind of a prince, and that's one among equals, the leading one among them, the principatus, the first citizen, right? So therefore, that's what the principatus really meant in Latin, right? And 31, on the authority of the clergy under the Merovingians. Among the barbarian people, priests ordinarily have power because they have both the authority. Among barbarian priests ordinarily have power because they have both the authority, which religion can give them, and the power which superstition gives among such people. Thus, we see in Tacitus that the priests were highly esteemed among the Germans, and that their presence introduces a police into the assembly of the people. So 61. What is 61? The silence is commanded by the priests who have the right to keep order, right? Tacitus. So they are the ones who give order. They police. This is the mores, rules and regulation mores. Oh no, that's a sketch. They were permitted only to chase and bind and to strike. So therefore, they can chase and bind and strike, which they did, not by the order of the prince or to inflict a penalty, but by a divine inspiration ever present in those who wage war. So therefore, this idea that it permitted them the right to chase, to bind, and strike, but that's it, in limited sense, not because the prince ordered them to do it, or to inflict a penalty, but rather to kind of by divine inspiration, right? One must not be surprised if, from the beginning of the reign of Merovingians, bishops are seen as arbiters of judgments. 63 is that note. He says that, okay. Now, in 62, the earlier point, kings are not unlimited nor bounded power. Moreover, permitted to, it is only permitted to, it is only uh, permitted to priests to punish, to put to the bonds, or to flog, and this is done not as it were as a penalty, but or as an order from the leader, but from commands of God, as if as if it were whom they believe to be present in the warrior. Right, this idea. So therefore, this is that only the kings were not absolute. The Megavidians, however, the reign of the Megavidian bishops are seen as arbiters. This is from that line of judgments, and and if they are seen appearing in the national assemblies, if they have great influence the resolution, if they greatly influence the resolution of the king, and if they are given so many goods, in other words, that all of a sudden, okay, they're arbiters, right? But then they're what? They're seen to be in national assemblies. They're given great influence over. They have influence over the kings, and they're given so many goods. Okay, so, it must not be surprised from the beginning of the Merovingian reigns, the bishops are therefore at this position of arbiters, right? And that they're given that this, if they're seen to be, assemblies, therefore their power and their presence of the superstition, the authority of the Merovingians. Well, here we end. If you have any comments or questions, please put them below. And when I see them, I'll respond to them. These are long, of course, these are long videos, so therefore it's going through it. And I hope people who are interested in this will make use of this. Next, if you liked it, like it, say like this, share it on social media, forward it about. If you're not subscribed, subscribe. Like the channel to grow a little bit. Do these things. If you, sorry, I didn't have anything. So subscribe, or like to grow the channel a little more. If you didn't like it, say you can thumbs down it, and please in the comments say why. Next thing you can do is if you want to help the channel grow, subscribe, but also if you want to help me do what I'm doing here to kind of financially assist, you can do so through Patreon or Subscribe Star. Links are below. Okay, I have not checked these out in a while, so who knows? Probably, I don't know. There's not. I don't think. Hopefully, there's people doing it, but we'll see. Another way you can help is by buying the book, or getting a book, buying these yourself or friends, or one of the books that is listed below by me. That's up there. Well, that's it. Okay, we will continue on the last part next 19, which is the last part of part 3 of the Spirit of Laws, and see you next time. Again, Mondays and Wednesdays we usually post these. Next is usually on Tuesday, Thursday we post something else, and Friday we either do live streams or some special thing, or some other special thing like some, who knows. Okay, well, take care and bye bye. See you later. Have a good day.